we'll make a start. Okay. My name's Mike Malina, Director of Energy Solutions Associates. I'm chairing the session, also speaking, so I've got a double task. So I've got to keep to time and make sure everything flows okay. Now, we've got a number of speakers today. First of all, I'm speaking on delivering a low-carbon building, which is a very general sort of presentation. We've then got Helen McHugh from EBM Pabst, who's the Head of Sustainable Technology, and she'll be talking about a simple and effective way of reducing your building's energy consumption. Then we've got, change of plan here, but we've actually got John Clayson, who's the Industry Practice Manager for Utilities for ESRI, so amend that one. And then, in theory, we might have Mark Denham from Mighty, but he hasn't appeared yet, so he may come later. So if I make a start, delivering low-carbon buildings. Now, it's quite interesting because I've been doing these type of events for quite some time, and I've been involved in this industry for quite a few decades now, and things are slowly but surely changing, but I'm still finding some very bad practice, and I'm also finding some quite alarming situations about how people are judging things. So what I'm going to do is guide you through some examples about what works and what doesn't. And we need to consider what's realistic. So that's very much the theme of what I'm going to do as a start. Now, a big question is, and this is very, very timely because we've heard of the government's white paper announcement this morning, which has just literally been released, which is looking at the future of potentially of energy policy. I still think it's pretty much confused, but that's something that seems to be reflected by all governments over the past few decades. And the question is, do we generate more energy, or do we cut waste energy efficiency, or do we do both? And we do need a combination, because obviously you need to generate, but you also need to make it efficient. And just by throwing more and more resources at something without making it efficient is not the answer. And that seems to be what governments have done in the past. And there's some good ways of making this in a sort of a good pictorial way to sort of educate people. And one of the things I'm very much in favour of is trying to make this message simple but effective. This is what I believe is the UK's energy policy. We have an energy bucket and it's got loads of leaks in it. And all we seem to do is throw more energy into it and it then leaks away. That is not a very efficient way of running an energy policy. But that does seem to be what we have. And that's not just this UK, but that's Europe and across the world. Another way of putting it is when I do energy audits, and I've been doing these for over 20 years, it's tantamount to a lot of people actually literally doing that and throwing money out of the window, because that's the sort of situation that I come across every day. A lot of people actually not managing their energy very well, and all they're literally doing is throwing their resources away. Now, there's a lot of hype and a lot of what I call green bling or other elements that people have come off. And I contributed to an article for CIBSE, the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineer, which I'm a member of. And it was asking about microgeneration. And this is something that I think that we need to wake up to, is that the short-term element here is that people like new things. They like to be seen to be doing something. And we've seen constant hype with some of the way that the renewables have been managed and introduced. And an example of that, of course, would be the PV fiasco and the FIT, the feed-in tariff. And this is very well illustrated by the article that was put in the CIBSE Journal. And they made it into the front cover. In fact, we have the author actually sitting in the audience. And it was a very good article and highlighted the real sort of dilemma. And I think that's something that we need to actually start to look at. Now, it's quite interesting because a lot of this can be measured on what we call technology hype. There's something called the technology hype curve that was introduced by Gartner a while back. And the idea of that is it's all about visibility over time. So the idea is you have a technology trigger that starts the technology off, and then you have what's known as a peak of inflated expectations. then a trough of disillusionment, then a period of realization as people dawns on people exactly what actually works and what doesn't, and then a plateau of productivity. And this is what I feel that low-carbon renewables are actually doing at the moment. And where would anybody think that PV is on some of the other renewables at the moment? I would say we've gone past the peak of inflated expectations and we're about to go into the trough of disillusionment. Now, it's quite interesting because from my perspective, I'm a building services engineer, chartered engineer, and I start to look at existing systems and what works. And I would say we should be looking at energy efficiency and commissioning and maintenance. And that green trace there on that graph is where I think reflects where we should be. We haven't gone through the peak of inflated expectations. We're gradually building on it, but it doesn't have the profile that it should. And that's really where we should be at. We should be concentrating very much on energy efficiency, commissioning, and maintenance, because they're the basics. That's what makes things work. That's how you deliver a low-carbon building. Now, I'm not against renewables. In fact, I'm very much in favour of them. I mean, I built my first solar thermal panel as a student in 1979. That's how far that goes back. But it has to be realistic, and it has to raise realistic expectations. And that's what we don't have at the moment. Too much hype and too much emphasis going into things that have quite a long payback with massive subsidies. So let's concentrate on the basics. Now, if I was only allowed to show you one slide today, I would concentrate on this one slide, because this, to me, is what we should be doing. What I call an energy hierarchy, actually delivering an energy efficient building. And the first place we should start every single time is reducing the need for energy in the first place. That's the key. Then we should be using it more efficiently, getting control of it, using building energy management systems, and we should integrate those systems, make sure that they're actually all communicating with each other, not competing against each other, because that's what we tend to have. We have a situation where we tend to find that existing systems aren't integrated, and all those new PV and all those new renewable systems are not actually working with the conventional systems. They're not integrated properly. So that's the sort of thing that we should be concentrating on. Then, and only then, when you've got number one and number two sorted out in regards to the energy hierarchy, then you start to look at supplying your energy and generating more from low carbon and renewable sources where appropriate. Now, what I'm finding is people are starting with number three. They're forgetting about one and two. Big mistake. Not only is it a big mistake technologically, but also financially. And so you can actually work on that. And then number four. Number four, we should be using our remaining fossil fuels as efficiently as possible, because we're not going to switch off fossil fuels overnight. Anybody who thinks we are is really, it's just not going to happen. So we need to use those more efficiently, and we need to start to phase out towards that low carbon future. And you could almost trace an exact correlation here between the financial payback. Number one is shorter. Number three and four will be longer, especially four in the long term, because fossil fuel prices will rise significantly. And that's very much the way things are going. It also is a fact that if you look on the bottom of that slide, the environmental benefits go the other way. There's more environmental benefit by reducing the energy in the first place and getting control of it and making it more efficient. That is the way our entire energy policy and everything we should do in buildings and everything we do in life generally that regards to energy and resources should be structured. That's the best possible way of doing it. So, key areas for delivering and operating a low-carbon, energy-efficient building. We should be concentrating on commissioning, making sure that the building is commissioned right from the first stop, and making sure that everything is handed over properly and is working right from the start. If you don't get the commissioning right from the start, you tend to find that the building will drift. It's very similar to a car. Unless you're getting a car regularly serviced, keeping on top of it, it will gradually drift. And it's the same, exactly the same. Then we need the concept of what we call continuous commissioning. So you don't just forget commissioning as a one-off, you continually service and improve the systems as we go. And that's very much the sort of basis of that energy hierarchy, back to the number two element, getting control of the energy and making sure it's efficient. Then we need to look at controls, making sure that everything is actually controlled well, actually communicates properly, and we can start to measure and monitor the energy that we're actually using. Communication. It's all about people's behavior, people's reactions to the technologies, people's feeling in control. Do they have control of their own environment? So it's very, very important that we concentrate very much on education, communication, training. Very, very important with regards to the whole process. And then compliance. We have a lot of legislation in this country, building regulations, various standards. We should be making sure that they're complied with and they're enforced. Because that's one of the biggest problems we face in the industry, is that we have so many rules and regulations, some of them good, some of them bad, most of them good and there for a reason, and the compliance is woeful. Government introduces legislation, doesn't seem to have any interest whatsoever in making sure things are working and actually complied with. And to me, that is a disaster. Because unless you're making sure that people are complying with the legislation, complying with the standards, making sure they're actually interested in saving energy and a reason that they're doing it, then it won't work. And that seems to be the shortfall that we have. It's back to that energy bucket. I would say that one of those big leaks in the energy bucket is the problem of non-compliance. And that's an issue that we should be concentrating on. Here is a good example. I mean, many of you will know buildings where it's too hot one end, too cold the other, because they've been poorly commissioned, or they've actually been progressively, what I call, or some people in the industry call, progressively decommissioned, because people have messed around with the settings, they haven't been maintained properly, and basically you end up with a situation where you're using even more energy. And a classic example is in an overheating building. What do people do in an overheating building? They open the windows. And it's tantamount to what I was showing you in that first slide, where they throw the money out the window. And at the other end of the building, where it's poorly controlled in terms of its air and water balancing, it's too cold. So what do? They bring in supplementary electric heaters. There's a few nods here. You know some of these buildings. They're not that uncommon. And to me, that is the biggest problem. We don't need to generate more power to waste in that energy bucket. We need to save what we've got. We need to use it more wisely, more control. That's the key. So this is very much the most important thing that we need to do with this. And we need a good process. We need a good energy management process, an energy management cycle, and that needs to be linked in. It's not in isolation. It needs to be linked in with controls, with building energy management systems, with using more efficient equipment, using inverters, for example, on motors, using more efficient motors, using a whole range of technologies that are available with a much, much better payback and a much better lower carbon delivery than all of the renewables that are being thrown at this at the moment. That's the way to actually work on this. And if anybody is into finance, or as a finance director or as a finance professional, they will recognize this cycle. This energy management cycle is almost exactly the same as a financial management cycle. You start off by measuring the data, you collect the data, you analyze it, you provide information to the end user and to the operations people and the maintenance people and the commissioning people. You then decide on where you're going to go with a strategy to try and reduce your energy and get control of it. You take action, you provide results, and then you start the whole process all over again until you arrive at utopia, which is obviously quite a way down the line. But that's the sort of classic cycle. Now, to me, part and parcel of that is the energy consumption in buildings with regards to building management systems. Any building that doesn't have good controls and isn't actually working to be able to be measured and controlled isn't worth doing, because you've got to have that element of control to make sure that everything is coordinated and working properly. Now, there are existing situations where you have a building with no controls at all, so they have no building management system, no BMS. So very much represented that nothing will change, as that top trace there. Sometimes you get people who put building management systems in, controls in, but they don't monitor. So what happens is they have no way of controlling or no way of sort of measuring what's happening to their energy. So their energy continues to rise, and I see this all the time. Then you get to a slightly better situation where you do have a building management system with controls and with energy monitoring. And that is a lot better because obviously you can then start to target and measure and see what exactly is happening. But it's still not perfect because you'll still have that oscillation in energy use. So finally, you have the best possible scenario, which is actually using a building management system with active efficiency measures. Now, if you employ that strategy, then you will reduce your energy and you will deliver a low carbon building. And that is the key. Now, all of this is now enshrined in a new standard in ISO 16484 and EN 15232, all these standards we now have. Now, any of you that are unfamiliar with this, look it up. If you've got an organisation that's looking for a good standard to work for, employ it. If you can work it through with ISO 50001 and all the other energy management standards, that's the way to go. Controls are key in the building. Getting control of the energy is absolutely key. It's all basically common sense. It all goes back to that figure I was trying to explain before about energy hierarchy. It's all about reducing waste. Wasting energy wastes money, simple as that. Every £1 saved on the fuel bill goes straight to the bottom line profit of an organisation or straight into your pocket. The cheapest kilowatt is the one that you never use. Simple as that. And ultimately, energy efficiency and energy saving and carbon reduction, if it's done correctly, worked on the basis of that energy hierarchy, will deliver the best financial returns. That is simply the best way forward. So that's me done. Thanks very much for listening for that. And then I'll introduce you to Helen McHugh from EBM Pabst, who will carry on presenting. Okay, thank you.